dig up a past I swore would stay buried.
You will always be a monster.
Ares! I have nothing more to hide.
The ghost of Sparta had been born.
The Blade of Olympus, a divine weapon of the gods. This weapon killed titans and gods alike. At one point, it even took Kratos' life. We see the Blade of Olympus make an appearance in 5 God of War games: God of War 2, God of War 3, God of War Ghost of Sparta, God of War Ascension, and God of War Valhalla. Today, I will go over 6 categories to determine which blade is the best. These categories are how the blades sound, the blades' designs, how much damage each blade makes, the speed of the blades, each of the blades' ability to crowd control, and finally, the blades' moves and integration into the games. At the end, we will make an overall comparison to select the best Blade of Olympus in the God of War series. Let's start with the top 5 Blade of Olympuses in the God of War series based on how they sound. Number 5. God of War Ascension. In God of War Ascension, the Blade of Olympus just sounds like any other sword. It sounds bland, and it doesn't feel like you're wielding a divine god-killing weapon. The only time the blade sounds like the Blade of Olympus in this game is when it hits the ground, but that's about it. Number 4. God of War Ghost of Sparta. In this game, the Blade of Olympus starts to sound more like, well, the Blade of Olympus. You can hear the power of the blade with each swing, but it doesn't sound too powerful and it sounds a bit light. Number 3. God of War 2. Now here is where the blade starts to sound good. You can really hear its power. With every swing, it sounds heavy and strong, and every hit truly sounds like you're using a divine weapon of the gods. It has extra sound effects that the other games don't have, like the bubble it creates to absorb the red orbs of enemies. It's interesting to note that in this game, the Blade of Olympus, for the first time, has the godly powers of Kratos within them when we use them, which could be why they sound so good in this game compared to how they sound in Ascension and Ghost of Sparta, where the Blade of Olympus did not have the godly powers of Kratos.
My way, that is the way of the gods. You must vow to forever serve me. I serve no one. Then you'll leave me no choice. Don't let him
Number 2. God of War Valhalla. Now in this game, the blade sounds great. It sounds hefty, it sounds vigorous, it sounds mighty, it sounds otherworldly. When it hits the ground, it sounds absolutely beautiful. But honestly, it doesn't sound as good as the Blade of Olympus in God of War 3. Number 1. God of War 3. In God of War 3, the Blade of Olympus sounds gorgeous. Every movement, every blow, every action is just perfect. It feels powerful, weighty, and magical. When it hits the ground, it sounds like it shakes the earth. Even when you're not moving, you can hear the power radiate from the blade.
Blade of Olympus, let the rage of Sparta rule your blade.
Okay, now let's move on to the design of the blades. The blades in this game have similar designs, but there are subtle differences between them. In last place we have, number 5, God of War 2. The Blade of Olympus in this game looks tragic. It has a distinct golden appearance with a curved blade. In cutscenes, sure, it looks stunning, but since we're comparing how the blades look like in-game in other God of War entries, I have to put this in last place because just look at this. This is just tragic. There are no details on this at all. The whole thing just looks blurry. The textures are poor and you can barely make out the design of the blade. Number 4. God of War Ghost of Sparta. In Ghost of Sparta, there isn't much of an upgrade in the details of the Blade of Olympus, but at least it's less blurry. You can make out more of what it is supposed to look like and the general design of the blade. For a PSP game, the graphics for this blade don't look that bad whatsoever. You can see the face on the hilt clearer, the points are sharper, the colors are more vibrant, and you can see the actual details on the blade and pommel. Overall, this design is better than the design of the blade in God of War 2. This is probably because this game came out after God of War 3, and so they already had a good idea of what the Blade of Olympus looked like. The Blade of Olympus in this game had a more streamlined and sleek appearance. It retained the golden color of the original look, but appeared somewhat more refined and sharper in design compared to its very early iteration. Number 3. God of War Ascension. This game featured the earliest chronological appearance of the Blade of Olympus in this series. The design of the blade in Ascension seemed more primal and rugged, showing less ornamentation and a more basic functional appearance compared to later versions. But you can actually see the details on this thing. The faces, the statues, the curved lines on the outer golden layer. The colors look good and lighting looks good. I just don't like the very noticeably different design of the blade. In this game, they decided to create these blue stripes that interrupt the outer ring of the original design. They also made the hilt extra long, which I don't really appreciate. If it wasn't for the better textures, lighting, and color, this design would have been put in last place solely for the fact that it strayed from the original look of the weapon. Number 2. God of War 3. This game has everything the previous games were missing. It got everything right. All the details are there. You can see the faces on the hilt clearly, the 3 statues holding it up, and the curved lines on the golden outer layer. The blue light of the blade didn't feel like just the glow emitting from inside the weapon, but it looked like a disrupted, powerful energy that radiated from within and around the blade. It has the original design of the blade with a golden outer ring and the short pommel. It was excellent. Number 1. God of War Valhalla. This blade had everything the blade in God of War 3 did, but better. In this game, the blade is ever so slightly thinner, but you can see every ounce of detail on the sword. It looks sleeker, more functional, it looks godly. There are a few differences in the curved lines on the golden outer layer, but it fits for Valhalla. The weapon is as big as it ever was, and it looks nice and sober. I love the waves of blue energy that follows the blade with every swing. Unlike the other blades where that energy left behind fades fairly quickly, the waves here linger a bit. It really makes you feel like the blade is just dripping with divine power, truly deserving of the number 1 spot. Alright, now let's move on to the damage of each of the blades. I won't be including the blade from Valhalla/Ragnarok, since in that game, your damage really just depends on your armor/strength. In last place though, we have number 4, God of War Ascension. In this game, the blade is used as a regular blade. It doesn't do too much damage, but it's quite hard to compare how much damage it does since you can only use it in multiplayer. From what I have seen though, the blade in this game is the weakest out of the 5. Number 3. God of War 3. In this game, even though you use the blade for your Rage of Sparta, it takes so long to kill enemies with it. As cool as it is, the damage output is dog poop. Despite the way he swings the blade in this game, it is not that strong. I mean, look how long it takes just to kill some of the easiest enemy types in God of War 3. Number 2. God of War Ghost of Sparta. In this game, the damage dealt by the blade is quite good. You can kill enemies with it with just a few hits. It has a good set of moves and it plays smoothly, but we'll get into that later. Number 1. God of War 2. Here the Blade of Olympus was simply overpowered. It killed enemies with only a couple of hits, and don't even get me started on that ranged attack it had when it was fully upgraded. The blade from God of War 2 is very powerful. Take a look at how easily you can take down the Colossus of Rhodes just with the blade's ranged attacks. The blade in this game truly felt like a god-killing weapon. Okay, now that we have covered the blade's damages, let's move on to which one is fastest. There is not much for me to say here since it is pretty obvious how fast each blade is just from looking at it, so I'm just going to list them for you. Number 5. The blade from God of War Ragnarok Valhalla. Number 4. The blade of Olympus from God of War 2. Number 3. The blade from God of War Ghost of Sparta. It was hard to determine which blade was faster when it came to the blade in Ghost of Sparta and the blade in God of War 2, but the one in Ghost of Sparta deemed to be ever so slightly faster. Number 2. The blade from God of War Ascension. Number 1. The blade of Olympus from God of War 3. By far the fastest blade is the one from this game. It's not even a competition. I wonder if it is because of how mad Kratos is in God of War 3. With that out of the way, let us go over the crowd control of each of the blades. At number 5, we have the blades from Ghost of Sparta. Most of the crowd control attacks from this game come from splash and electrifying damage from either Zeus or his gauntlet that targets multiple enemies at once. Number 4. God of War Ascension. In this game, the special attacks for the Blade of Olympus are the only reason it is somewhat good at crowd control. Watch for yourself. Other than that, the blade on its own is only moderately decent at crowd control, and that is why it is in the number 4 spot. Number 3. God of War 2. The sheer strength and awesomeness of this weapon in this game on its own means you won't need to do much crowd controlling, but your attacks are interruptible and you will have to block and dodge every now and again. Other than that, the blade offers sweeping attacks and area of effect abilities that allow Kratos to manage groups of enemies efficiently. Number 2. God of War Valhalla. In this game, the attacks have a much wider range and a lot of splash damage. It also does loads of stun damage, stopping enemies in their tracks, sending enemies into the air, leaving them vulnerable, making the weapon in this game good at controlling crowds, especially if you are good at parrying. Although we never really get that many enemies on screen in the recent God of War games as we did in the older ones, the Blade of Olympus in Ragnarok does a pretty good job at crowd control. Number 1. God of War 3. The blade in this game is the king of crowd control. It very easily takes the number 1 spot. Your attacks are uninterruptible, you're too fast for the enemies to react, you close gaps between enemies quickly, and you just swing the blade like an absolute madman. Without a doubt, the Blade of Olympus in God of War 3 is the best at crowd control. Finally, let's go over the movesets of each of the blades and how they are integrated into the game. In last place, we have number 5, God of War Ghost of Sparta. In this game, you can only use the Blade of Olympus as Zeus in the combat arena. You can't use the Blade of Olympus as Kratos, and worse yet, you cannot play as Zeus with the Blade of Olympus in the main game. Zeus's moveset isn't that bad though. Unfortunately, not all the attacks include the Blade of Olympus, and for the reasons I have stated above, I put the blade from this game in last place. But let us quickly go over the movesets. There's the basic combo where Zeus swings his blade multiple times when you spam square 5 times. There's the heavy attack where Zeus slams the ground with the gauntlet of Zeus, which sends enemies flying when you hit triangle. There's the heavy combo where Zeus rises up after slamming the ground and comes back down again with another slam when you hold triangle twice. There's the divine retribution where Zeus sends a bolt of lightning having the same effects as the Scourge of Uranus and the Eye of Atlantis when you tap R2. Then there's the special attack where Zeus tackles the foe with his gauntlet when you hit circle. Number 4, God of War Ascension. As I have stated earlier, you can only use the Blade of Olympus in this game in the multiplayer mode, but in my opinion, that is much better than just being able to use it in a combat arena, even if, again, we cannot use the blade as Kratos. You can only use the blade as a nameless, redeemed warrior. The game has a pretty neat set of moves for the weapon though. If it was not for how it was integrated into the game, this blade probably would have been higher on the list. Anyway, I don't have footage of all the attacks, so I will detail them in depth for you. With square, you can use the blade's basic light attack, which can be pressed a total of 3 times for a combo. Using this in the air swings the sword left and right. Holding square swings the sword in front of you, then dashes back creating some space only to launch forward with another swing which is unblockable. With triangle, you can use the blade's basic heavy attacks which are also unblockable. They perform an overhead swing, slamming the sword down in front of you. Using this attack in mid-air, swings the sword directly below you. With L1 and square, Sparta's Lament charges you forward a short distance, performing 2 spin slashes that are unblockable. Performed in mid-air, this attack makes you dive diagonally forward to perform the attack. Both of these are shockwave attacks that send out a radial blast. With L1 and triangle, Divine Reckoning raises the sword above your head and ending it in a slam. You can move during the entire duration of the attack, and it is unblockable. This attack summons a tornado that sucks in opponents. Number 3, God of War 3. In this game, you can only use the blade in rage mode. Sure, you can activate Infinite Rage once you finish the story, but it still has its flaws. The blade made killing enemies a chore and its batteries burned out fast. When I want to use it to take out a Minotaur or a Cerberus or something, Kratos just stabs the wrong people. He just dashes around, and even then, it makes a bunch of hits which never connect. But using it made you feel amazing. It made you feel like you were the God of War, and its attacks were uninterruptible and made you somewhat invulnerable. Plus, it had a moderately neat move list. Divine Reckoning, which is used unfortunately only as the weapon-specific magic ability of the Blades of Athena, Kratos takes the Blade of Olympus and stabs it into the ground, creating an enormous vortex of wind around him when tapping R2. Activating Rage of Sparta with L3 plus R3 draws the Blade of Olympus. With Spartan Fury, you can use the Blade of Olympus to deliver damage to your enemies by spamming square. With Spartan Spirit, you can use the Blade of Olympus to launch enemies into the air by holding triangle. With Spartan Glory, you can use the Blade of Olympus to create an explosive wave that launches enemies into the air by hitting X. Number 2. God of War Valhalla. If we had received this weapon in the main story, it would have been perfect. Unfortunately, we only get in the DLC, and you can actually use it in the actual game after you've finished the main story. Even then, you can only wield the blade in rage mode, so you have a limited period where you can use it at a time. However, the meter depletes slowly and you can replenish it with parries. Charged attacks deplete more of your rage quicker, but also refill some health if the hit is successful. To activate the blade, you need to enable your legacy rage by selecting it in the menu and then pressing L3 plus R3 when your rage meter is full. You get your light attacks by pressing R1, and at the end of the combo you release a cool wave of energy. You then have your heavy attacks by pressing R2, which also releases a burst of energy at the end of the combo. Divine Retribution also makes a comeback. With L2, the blade shoots a laser that can hit enemies from afar. Then with L1, you can obviously parry attacks but cannot block them. Finally, with Triangle, you can use the blade to sweep yourself closer to a targeted enemy. Number 1. God of War 2. The Blade of Olympus in this game is the absolute best. This blade is upgradable, you can parry with it, you can block with it, you can use it anytime after you complete the game, and when it is fully upgraded, it releases a beam of energy with every attack. You're not forced to use it only in rage mode, or only in a combat arena, or only in a multiplayer mode. Once you finish the main story of God of War 2 and unlock the blade, it is pretty much like you gained a brand new weapon for you to play with. It gives us a level of replayability to God of War 2 that neither Ragnarok nor God of War 3 give us, since, again, in Ragnarok, you can only activate the blade in rage mode even in New Game Plus. And in God of War 3, you need rage mode activated all the time, with cheats after finishing the story, which means you cannot jump, it is inaccurate, you will have to keep activating and deactivating your Spartan Rage, and you will have to wait for the initial animation of the rage being enabled to end every time. The Blade of Olympus in God of War 2 is simply superior. It is the only blade that is actually really powerful and makes you feel like you could kill gods with it. With the Blade of Olympus in this game, you get your regular light and basic attacks with square and triangle, but then it has different levels. At level 1, you get Divine Absolution, where Kratos can stab the blade into an enemy multiple times with L1 plus square. You get the Divine Retribution, where you can unleash a blast of godly might with L1 plus triangle. At level 2, you get Divine Sacrifice, where with L1 plus circle, you can drain orbs from all enemies who come into contact with a sphere of sacred power. At level 3, you get Anger of the Gods, where all attacks now discharge powerful blasts of, you guessed it, godly might. In this category, the Blade of Olympus in God of War 2 takes the cake easily. With that being said, let us decide the overall winner. First, let us take a look at a simplified ranking of each blade based on the categories we have mentioned. Based on our evaluations, God of War 2 seems to have excelled in movesets, integration, and damage output, making it the top choice overall. God of War Valhalla follows closely with excellent sound and design, as well as a good and accurate moveset with better crowd control. God of War 3 also impresses in speed and crowd control, more so than Valhalla. Its integration was also alright, but its inaccuracy and little damage output is a major drawback. So the winner is the blade from God of War 2. If they had added the Blade of Olympus as a proper weapon to the game in Ragnarok, one that is upgradable even with its current moveset, that is not as extensive as the moveset from God of War 2, this blade could have won first place. Imagine having Brock and Sindri upgrade the Blade of Olympus for us throughout the game. The blade from Valhalla fixes a lot of the issues the blade had in God of War 3, but it just cannot beat the blade from God of War 2 despite its awesome sound, design, moveset, and the amount of damage it could do with a pretty good armor set slash fair amount of strength. Also, the blade was pretty slow, so yeah. Anyway, there you have it. Shout out to PopSor, the first official Give Me God of War member of the ABD Bay community. I am very grateful for your subscription. PopSor, you have already probably had early access to this video, as it is one of your perks, but hit me up if you would like to collab or join me on a live stream where we could just chat or play a game of your choice. Also, if I could have your Instagram username, I would love to add you to the Gods of War Council group chat. Your comments will be my top priority as it is one of your perks as a Give Me God of War member of this channel. For anyone else who wants to dig into the membership perks of this channel, just click the join button down below to see the perks of each membership tier. Join with Demigod status to gain access to the Gods of War Council where we can discuss your theories, ideas, and more. Other than that, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more content just like this. And don't forget to comment what you think of these crazy ideas down below. Do you agree with my top 5 list? Tell me down below.